In any case, that's actually not even what I wanted to talk about. That's just an update on how I'm doing lately. The real topic of tonight is violence, specifically how violence is just the way the way that it's expressed, the way it's perceived, and how different subcultures relate to it. So the first thing I wanted to talk about, which some of y'all may have seen, which I'm sure some of y'all seen, was a recent incident, I should say, where some folks, I forget what state they were in, but it was one where, it had snowed recently, and a couple that had lived across the street from one of their neighbors kept shoveling their snow, apparently from, I guess, the driveway or walkway, whatever, to their neighbors. Which, is inconsiderate, it's rude, and it's one of those things where you can't necessarily call the police or even like homeowners association. You can't really call anybody to do that. That's something that, like, a kind of a pettiness that you're kind of left to deal with on your own. But the thing is, if your neighbors aren't willing to cooperate or aren't willing to meet you halfway, I don't, well, anyway, let me get to the rest of the story. So what happens is, when the neighbor who was discovering that this couple was snubbling the show into their driveway, he naturally became upset and went and confronted them over it. Like, what are you doing? And this couple, they immediately just started talking shit, saying you're a pussy and, whatever, blah, 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 blah. Just being completely inconsiderate, completely disrespectful, not trying to meet them halfway, not trying to be diplomatic, just being petty little fucking brats, right? And so then what happened is, at some point, the one dude, the offended dude, said, I'm going to go, I don't know if he even said, I'm going to go get my gun, but like, he stormed back into his house. The couple was still waiting out, taunting him in the driveway and shit, talking shit about him. He comes out with a gun. He has it aimed, a handgun. He has it aimed as he's walking up to them. And they're still talking shit. Like, he's in your face with he's walking towards you with a fucking gun. Those are the same people would see that shit and be running away and trying to say, hey man, calm down, we can talk this out, blah, 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 right? And the dude starts shooting at them, and he gets off about 4 shots, and the couple is still talking shit. Now, he also must have not had great aim, because it took about like the 5th or 6th shot until the husband in the couple, kind of like fell back as if he had gotten hit or whatever, and started screaming and crying. But it was at that point, and when he finally got shot with the 6th damn shot from the gun, that he realized, oh, we might have fucked up. And the woman continues to talk shit, and he puts, the rest of the clip in her. You know what I'm saying? He shoots her sometime in her torso a few times, and then also looks like at least a couple of times in the head, if not the neck, right? And then, you see the man, he runs away off screen or whatever, and you can hear him screaming, and then the woman, she lying in the street, and you can see blood starting to collect, even though the footage isn't it isn't the best footage, but you can tell she's leaking. And then a couple of neighbors come out to check on them and then quickly run the hell away. So then, as they're both laying on the ground, a couple of neighbors come to check on them, immediately see what's up, and then just walk right back away, right, to call 911, I presume. So then that same neighbor who had just emptied a clip into both of them, right? He wasn't done. He went and he grabbed a larger gun. I don't know if it was like a semi-automatic rifle or just like a Draco, like a high-powered handgun or whatever, but he grabbed whatever that second gun was and went back and shot them again. And when he shot the woman, because she was closer to him, you could clearly hear him saying, and actually it got cut off at the halfway because of the gunshot, but he says, you should have kept right in her head. No hesitation, and then walked over and finished the husband as well, right? It's wild. And then the thing is that he ended up turning the gun on himself afterwards, clearly not wanting to deal with the ramifications of the thing, feeling like his emotions overtook him, I mean, the thing is that I'm not gonna say that I necessarily support the shit. But it's just kind of frustrating when you think about these little ways in which, like, that was bullying. What I'm saying? That couple. What I'm saying? They were doing something knowing they're going to antagonize their neighbor, knowing it's something disrespectful, and knowing that it's something so petty and annoying that it's not something you can really call the police over. You can't really sue anybody over. You can't like call like what was it, HOA, housing authorities. You can't call them over it. They're gonna laugh at you, right? All over snow. And my thing is, and the thing is that like I started off saying that this whole thing is gonna be about violence or whatnot, right? And it's like, I don't know, man. I mean, I guess this is like where where I'm actually pretty understanding of I'm pretty understanding. I'm more understanding to it. Like I'm not as bothered by it when I actually saw it, because I'm just thinking, I'm just like, oh, this is so petty, this is so stupid and shit. But then I'm thinking about all the bullies in the world, how they don't get checked, how they don't get shown that there's any repercussions for the things that they do, right? They get passes, or now there has been this wave of, as people are talking more about institutionalization, people are talking about systemic biases, people are talking about implicit and explicit biases that people may have against one another, is that we're now starting to give a pass to people just for saying that we're starting to give a pass to shitty people, who want to bring up elements of how their upbringing, or my family this, or blah blah blah, and that has nothing to do directly with this couple, but just how the attitudes and perceptions have changed. Because this dude who shot his neighbors was clearly like, oh, I'm not just gonna be able to say it was a heat of passion, like especially after he went and got in the second handgun and whatnot. It's fucked up, but it's like at the same time, it's like. And I don't necessarily believe in quote unquote fighting words, but it's like when you talk a certain amount of shit, it's like you're asking for a response. And some people, the only thing they understand is overwhelming force in return. They got to get fucked up. Some people only understand getting smacked up or something like that. Honestly, that goes for men and women, because there's, definitely women who push the buttons, antagonize, knowing that like, oh, you're not going to do anything because I'm a woman. And, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, this dude just took it to the complete extreme. He went and completed a double homicide. It's shit. Not the level of retaliation that I think is necessarily acceptable, but I'm like, yeah, this is also why being nice and being courteous to people and being diplomatic and being in de-escalation is a part of women's is a big thing for women, is a big thing for minorities in different communities and whatnot. Rage, it, can be deadly, but the thing is, we have these emotions and whatnot for a reason, and people have to understand one another's boundaries, and the thing is that like, it's not just about being nice, or necessarily being super empathetic to each individual, but just kind of under this general understanding that you never know how close somebody is to the edge, and you never know what somebody's limits are. You don't know if the person that you're pushing around gives less of a fuck than you do. And anybody that gives less of a fuck than you do, whatever the situation is, you don't want to get in the way, antagonize them more than you would absolutely have to. These neighbors, apparently the couple, they had been assholes before, saying they've done this type of thing before. And like I said, this isn't something like any real, institutional organization would take up, because it's like, it's just an example of petty kind of bullying behavior, right? But it's adults, but this kind of goes into the next iteration, or the next like part of it, is what I think about is the zero tolerance policies in schools, right? So when I was a teenager and whatnot, right, the school that I went to, it was not a violent school. It was not a ghetto school. Well, I went to various schools, right? And I would say that when I was younger, I went to like more hood schools, but that was like elementary. And then, but then after that, like 5th, 6th grade onward, when I was living in a different place, they were much nicer, a lot more suburban folks, a lot more just chill working class, kids and whatnot. And there were some, thugs and gangsters at some of the later schools in high school and whatnot, and middle school, but it just wasn't that serious, luckily. And plus, it was a lot of different people from different backgrounds, a lot of different, economic classes. So it was really diverse, and for the most part, the circles I ran with, especially, were pretty peaceful. But the thing is that we all hear stories about what's going on in other parts of the neighborhood, or maybe you live in a place that's that's quite different than the schools you go to or where you work, right? Or vice versa. And so you hear stories, you see things, you might even find yourself in the middle, in the crossfire, literal crossfire of some shit, right? And so what happened in these schools is that, like, this is around the time when they really started enforcing dress codes and whatnot. So that way you could, so that way people weren't sending as much signals about like their wealth or about gang affiliations or, different things like that. And of course people always try, find ways to flip it and whatnot. And there's, different pros and cons to it, but it's like you get the mentality, right? But the thing that was a lot more detrimental, and not just from and detrimental in various ways, was the zero tolerance policy. And the reason why this was so bad is because, like, oh, if you're caught in a fight, if you're caught, saying in any type of situation and shit, then all parties involved, and even some people who were witnessing it and not going to snitch about it, you would get punished. Now, the thing is that, like, on one hand, you want to be understanding of the fact that, like, oh, that these are adults, that these aren't their kids, and that there's laws about you being able to actually actively engage with them. If you see kids fighting or whatnot, you can get sued if you touch somebody, even if they're, holding a weapon and shit. These fucked up rules. And especially, like, this is, I'm talking about LA County. All the schools I've ever gone to up until college were in some part of LA County, right? And even though none of the schools I went to were necessarily violent, it's like I've lived in various neighborhoods. I've dealt with different shit right across, the street from my house and whatnot, or had other stuff happen to friends, or just, reading stories. It's like as much as we may be able to either desensitize ourselves or get ourselves into a redundant cycle of being fearful and intimidated and anxious, those feelings are there for a reason, and these incidents, most of them are real. There are plenty of teenagers who go around just to start fights and who kill and who rape and who, steal and all this shit. It happens. And no, that doesn't mean try them as an adult, but it means that they still need to be punished and recognize that in their current state of behavior and mindset, they are a threat to society, to everybody, to themselves, to their family, to other people, to everyone. And I just feel that there's been with the zero tolerance policy, what ends up happening with this shit is people who don't give a fuck, kids who don't give a fuck, already have a record, or they just don't have this, they're just super antisocial, they don't care or whatever, right? They understand the rules, they understand the laws and shit, especially because they've gone through the system to a certain degree. So they already know, that, like, oh, this thing get a slap on the wrist, or if I'm not using a weapon, or if I'm not, blah, blah, blah. They know all the details. Whereas a square like me, a regular, somebody who's not in the shits like that, when they say, like, oh, if you start a fight, you can go to jail or get suspended, and someone, no, immediately, like, you don't understand that there's, like, second and third chances, or that there's probation, or that there may be a cool down period, or that suspension, they can, that there's different caveats, right? It's not always just like you fuck up once and then you're gone. However, this zero tolerance policy thing was basically their attempts at doing that shit. It's kind of like a school version of three strikes laws, where you treat everybody as if they're as if they already have three strikes. It's this presumption of, like, first of all, it's a presumption of guilt, which completely goes against, like, our actual legal system, right? And secondly, what ends up happening is the people who don't give a fuck and who are antagonizing and already in the system and shit, they're just kind of like, oh, okay, whatever, I'll just transfer to another school, or I'll just be out on the streets, or I didn't want to be at school anyway, blah, 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 blah. But then the people who are just trying to defend themselves from the antagonizers, they end up getting treated the same. So they end up getting the same punishment. And the thing is, these punishments, they mess up, saying you miss days from school or whatever, you get behind in your work, that fucks up your academic opportunities. And then also, they look at your suspensions, or they look at other incidents you might have gotten into. Stuff can be used against you in terms of employment. It's you know what I'm saying? Basically what it does is that because of the zero tolerance policy, when it comes to, like, violence and fighting and whatnot, people who are just trying to practice self-preservation and protect themselves get treated as if they are antagonizers. And because this fucks up your opportunities in life to do other things, well, your life naturally starts to go on the course of doing more fucked up stuff you normally wouldn't have cared about. And probably a popular example of this I can think of is the rapper 21 Savage. 21 Savage, who grew up primarily in a rough part of Atlanta. I don't remember exactly which part, but that's one of the things that he detailed about his coming up. Like, kind of his introduction to the shit, to the gang shit and the fight and the gun violence and everything, was some niggas was bullying, or just people. I don't know what the ethnicity was, but some people was bothering him. They fucked him up. I'm like, oh, we're gonna fuck you up and everything. So I gotta be able to protect myself. It's like there's no nobility in getting your ass kicked and possibly dying or whatever, because then you're not alive to continue to practice that piece. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of that oxymoron, right? That sometimes you have to engage in war to sustain peace. But that's really how it is, because the thing is, who are you warring against? You know what I'm saying? But then if somebody's implementing a zero tolerance policy, and if somebody's not familiar with the neighborhood and with the particular people that they're dealing with, then you just start to look at everybody as a criminal, and anybody that's throwing a fist or is get caught with a gun or a knife or anything, you're just like, oh, you're just a piece of shit, you're just trouble, let's just send you off. And this pushes a lot of people who normally don't even want to get into that shit. It's like, well, this is the only course I have available at this point now. You know what I'm saying? Because you've been demonized and pushed out from this goofy ass across the board policy violence. It's just so frustrating. It's just so frustrating, because I think about that shit too. I think about that. I think about like all the bullies, all the pieces of shit and everything, and we used to just be told that, like, oh, their lives are going to become shit and they're going to, they're not going to go nowhere. And it's like, for quite a bit, it's true. A lot of people in the streets don't live long, healthy, fulfilling lives. They don't get to retire, at a decent age. They're you can be broke in jail, or just, saying, fucked up in other ways, become a hobosexual, where the only places where you can sleep peacefully at night, you have to sleep with, somebody to get that hospitality. Some people do that for decades. But then the third thing I wanted to bring up in this whole thing about violence is the glorification of violence and intimidation and bullying, and especially, let's say it, in the black and brown communities. It's like, has there been, gangs have been around for a while. The streets are the streets, saying poor people are poor people and everything. It's like this stuff of like poor people preying on one another is nothing new. You prey on whoever is closest to you in proximity to you, but also those whom have the least, or the less ability to retaliate or protect themselves. So then what happens naturally, and this is just another human thing, is people create, gangs, and sometimes, they call them social clubs or whatever. But basically it's like, hey, we get bullied by this group for this reason or whatever. And, it could be over an ideological difference. It could be just basic, race shit, ethnic shit. It could just be, it could be over a multitude of things. But that's very often what it is, either a difference in ideology or just personal, vendettas, or, racial and ethnic conflicts, right? Because people are very simple-minded, just like, oh, you have a face like mine, you have a skin tone like mine, or you have a religion like mine, so naturally we'll click up. But let's be frank here, is that while the glorification of violence, and idolizing war and idolizing, fighters and everything, that's always been present. But let's be honest here and talk about that the influence of like Southern California gangster culture and how it was basically broadcast to the world, to every corner of the world via rap music, mainstream rap music. I mean, a lot of the elders and shit that were talking about this stuff in the late 80s and the early 90s when gangster rap was becoming bigger, they had a point. You know what I'm saying? Like, that doesn't mean necessarily somebody that's listening to hardcore gangster rap music is going to go out and commit violence and shit, but it normalizes stuff. You know what I'm saying? Because the thing is, no matter whatever it is that you saturate your mind with, and if you choose and you insulate yourself with people who are of the same mindset, you know what I'm saying, then it becomes more acceptable to do certain things, and you accept it. That's all it takes. So the thing is, like, our elders, they kind of had a point. They had a point in some of the backlash of saying this, celebrating the culture of what gangsters do. Because it's one thing to talk about the street. It's one thing to talk about coming up, and doing things that you feel guilty over and needing to keep up a certain persona and carrying around a certain perspective of yourself towards, other people. It's like, I get that. But those are really just like coping mechanisms, right? Because if you have the ability to get away from that shit, and you recognize that the stuff is traumatic and is damaging for you or whatever, and that there's different opportunities, then you should take that. You should take that shit. You know what I'm saying? But a lot of motherfuckers, um, they don't take the hint. They see that as enabling them. They see that as enabling getting that money and getting the fame and whatnot, as and getting the attention, as justifying those actions and saying like, well, if I made it this far being able to do this stuff, then let's keep it up. Let's take it to the next level. You know what I'm saying? There are so many more guns, drugs, and violence in the streets. You know what I'm saying? Even though violence overall has gone down, but within the epicenters of where the shit happens, you know what I'm saying? Certain parts of New York, certain parts of Chicago, parts of Atlanta, all over the damn place. It's either stayed the same or it's gotten worse. And as much as we want to criticize the police and talk about institutional biases in the government and shit like that, everything can't just be boiled down to the white man this, you know, saying racism that, slavery this, institutions, you know, this. Is like, yes, there's still plenty, you know, saying evidence for that shit. But at the same time, there are black people, black and brown people represented in every other walk of life. And it's not just because somebody handed it to them or because they gave up their blackness, they traded in their blackness, and now they're you know, um, yeah, they didn't betray anybody. It's just that your idea of what it means to be whatever is limited. It's a limited framework. You know what I'm saying? And these motherfuckers, even though they see their homies die, even though they hear about, you know what I'm saying, their own family members and friends getting killed or robbed or assaulted or whatever, instead of saying maybe we should go and just try to find a way to settle things with people and end things on a diplomatic note, because this cycle can be unending. And exactly what we're seeing is the cycle undying, an undying cycle. You know what I'm saying? Because you can't just turn a blind eye to motherfuckers who are doing drive-bys in broad daylight and just doing shootings and you know, saying carrying drugs and doing carrying guns and doing drug deals and shit at a fucking school and at the gas stations and you know, you can't do that. That interrupts fucking regular day-to-day like commerce and shit. And the day-to-day commerce is gonna bring in a lot more funds, you know what I'm saying, than niggas, you know, or just people in general, whoever's, you know, drug dealing, because it ain't just niggas, right? In your neighborhood, you get a lot more money, you know, same for other shit. It doesn't attract as much violence. At least not open in the air, you know, if you're in a third world country or something like that. But even then, it's like overall, that's still cumulative, right? Because if the shit's gonna happen in a third world country, unfortunately, anyway, then it's like we also don't need to add the shit to our own neighborhoods, right? And when you look at, you know, like the Chicago thing, like it's become a sticking point for like conservatives and far right to just be like, oh, black, you know, this is their culture, this is black folks, this is what they do and shit. It's like we gotta acknowledge, you know what I'm saying, that there is a culture of glorification of all this shit. There is a culture of glorifying murder. There's a culture of glorifying, you know what I'm saying, interrupting people's, you know what I'm saying, daily regular human activities, civilians or gang members, just to start fights or just to cause violence. And then of course there's always the bystanders getting shot or getting killed or getting assaulted or having to be traumatized, you know. And then motherfuckers want to tell you, oh, don't talk about this street shit, you don't know about this, you ain't about that life or whatever, blah 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 blah. It's like fuck you in that life. Why the hell would I want to be involved in this shit when you're talking about you want to come chill and shit, and then knowing that niggas brag about like robbing somebody's grandma or robbing like, you know, say some corner store or whatever, and then just come and chill with you and just act like, you know, nothing happened. You know what I'm saying? Because like I said, it's one thing to do shit as a means of survival and feeling guilty. You know what I'm saying? But it's I mean, the thing is, like, after a while, you have to, you grow a thick skin, and some people, you know what I'm saying, come to realize that they enjoy it. They enjoy this delusion of themselves as being a predator, or anywhere that they go, or anything that they decide they want, they can go and take it, and as long as they get away with it, then it's righteous. But the moment anybody tries to judge them, then it's like, oh, you don't understand, you know what I'm saying, what I've been through, only God can judge me, you know what I'm saying, like, I'm just, you know, you don't know all the things I've seen, blah, 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 blah. It's like, nigga, actually, we've seen and heard quite a bit of not just you, but everybody around you, because y'all don't seem to shut the fuck up about it, you know? It's like every other fucking day, it's like disregard any of the news, disregard any of the videos and shit that you see of, like, of this stuff. It's like, we've all gone to school with these people. We've worked with these people. We've lived around these people. I've lived most of my life in Southern California, mainly around different parts, or really just the whole time I've been in SoCal has been different parts of Los Angeles. I've seen a whole bunch of different shit. And the thing is, it can happen anywhere. It can happen in the fucking Inland Empire. It can happen anywhere in LA County. It can happen in Orange County. You know what I'm saying? And this culture is just, the thing is, that shit is just spread everywhere. To where you have, like, where Bloods and Crips started specifically as a thing just in certain LA, South Central LA neighborhoods, has now spread around the world. You can find Blood and Crip sets, you know what I'm saying, all around the fucking world. And people who, you know, this doesn't necessarily mean that everybody in those areas was always getting along. People always have their disagreements and shit, but they weren't drawn along those lines. You know what I'm saying? It's a new line that's being drawn, and it's such a simple, basic ass one. Oh, you rock that color, I rock this color, and we're enemies. It's, you know, and the thing is that, like, you end up doing real fucked up shit to one another, which then gets added into the memory, and so that red and that blue comes to signify something deeper, or not deeper, but it becomes embedded in people's memories as something deeper in their psyche and their identity than it really is. You know? It's so frustrating. It's so fucking frustrating, you know, because it's like, I'm a black man, and I have to go and interact with the world with this face, you know what I'm saying, looking the way I do, and you know what I'm saying, and it's like I have to, it's like on numerous ends you get confronted with people saying you're not black, or other people, you know, which is like, you could say, you know, people will say, oh, you know, grow up and shit, but it's like, no, because it's like people's perception is still so fucking limited. And it's not just non-black people, it's other black people who want to tell you how fucking limited your scope of the black experience is. It's like, no, I haven't been to jail, no, I haven't been this, and it's not because I'm especially good. It's not because I'm an especially good person. I think it's more so that I'm just an exceptionally lucky person. But at the same time, I never had an allure with the streets. I never had an allure with street shit. Because to me, it's like to a certain degree, it's like I learned that, like, fighting and stuff is sometimes necessary, but it isn't something glorious or beautiful, and that it doesn't really fill me with joy to see somebody in pain. But at the same time, I understand that once that person is able-bodied again, a lot of times people will go back to doing the same shit. So somebody that gets fucked up or whatever for trying to do something fucked up, well, they're gonna go back and do it again. Because most people are not operating when they do, especially when they do, you know, bullying or intimidating people or trying to commit acts of violence and shit. They're not doing it simply because they're not simply doing it as just like a basic impulse. They are justifying it, and they go through, you know, everybody goes through scenarios in their head and tries to reinforce, you know, saying their behavior and justify it, right? You know, at a certain point, you have to recognize the fact that people buy into ideologies and reinforce them. It's not just people being, you can't just accept, like, oh, you know, my parents raised me this, and I wanted to look for a family, blah, 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 blah. Like, yeah, those instincts and stuff to a certain degree are, you know, natural, but it's like, at a certain point, when do you take ownership? When do you take ownership that, like, that you have to lead your own life to a certain degree, that there's always a certain amount of things that are going to be in your control? Most other shit, yeah, ain't going to be in your control. But there's quite a few things that we each do have in our control. You know what I'm saying? And, you know what I'm saying? Especially when you think about the fact that, like, you see grown-ass people, you know what I'm saying, in their 20s and shit, joining gangs and whatnot, and going out and committing the acts to justify their association with these people, right? You know, I've just become, I guess what I'm just trying to say is that, like, just changing my views on you know, how I've been taught about violence, how I've been taught to look at the different subcultures in this country, and how we perceive things. You know, we have a certain subset of the culture that glorifies violence, intimidation, and bullying, and it has become quite a few people that come from this world have managed to, you know, saying, get more money, to attract a lot of attention, and to get the approval of a lot of people, and still continue these same antics to the detriment of themselves and so many other people around them. You know, and this is something that our elders foretold us about concerning the rise of gangsta hip hop in the late 80s and early 90s. And a lot of people, and even though I was young at the time, I was born in 89, so even by 95 I was only 6 years old. But by that point, I had already seen at least the murder of Tupac and Biggie on the news, you know, hearing about two of the biggest stars, not just in rap, but in music, around the world get killed, and it was over. The assumption. A lot of people assume that like, oh, it was the government sitting up or the police or whatever like that. But this shit, like hearing these stories and everything, like Biggie's murder, I think is still unsolved. But the one with Tupac was one that it was known at the time, but the streets just stays quiet and shit. That old, don't snitch or whatever. But the police eventually put it together that it was just another gang member, and it was a nigga that Tupac had fought that night because he went to a Tyson fight, right? He went to go see a Tyson fight, right? When Tyson was in his prime, and I think it was before the fight. I want to say that he went and fought this dude or whatever, beat up this known gang member who was a known fucking shooter, right? A real down motherfucker. And whereas Tupac was just kind of like, that was just like a costume. It was just a performance that he was leaning. He was starting to believe his own shit and believe and buying to the delusion. Saying the power fantasy. He was starting to believe that there was real power in the fantasy. He really started to think that like he was this untouchable gangster or whatever, right? And it's a template that's continued on in spite of the fact it's exactly what got him killed, because he went and fought this dude or whatever, right? I think went to the Tyson fight. And then afterwards, when he was leaving with Suge or whatever, this dude went and shot up the fucking car. And it's known and it's been established and whatnot. But the thing is, you still hear people saying that like, no, it was the police, it was the government, they didn't want to see a black man rise. It's like, no, y'all don't want to fucking accept the fact that he was delusional. He was smelling his own fucking farts too much. He was getting gassed up too much. He had bought into a very destructive part of the culture, one which he was adamantly standing against just a couple of years prior, because he had went to prison for that rape charge or whatever, right? And which the backstory on that is it's really questionable at this point whether that actually happened, but that's a whole other thing. But in any case, seeing that happen and then seeing Biggie, whom never really seemed to have like a gang affiliation. I mean, he was he made hardcore rap or whatever, but it was never like, this is from New York before gangs were a real big thing. So it was just more of like, yeah, I got me and my peoples, whatever, and we'll fuck you up or whatever. But it wasn't like we out mobbing, we just looking for people to fuck up. We were looking to be predators and shit, right? Right? Like we criticized Hillary Clinton, those who are in politics or whatever, for referring to young black and brown, especially men, as being super predators and like, oh, they have to be put to heel. But you got to understand that if you've grown up in places that don't have that, where you don't know about urban drug dealing, you don't know about these urban, if you grow up in these places where you're not used to drive-by shootings, you're not used to, saying people selling drugs or selling ass out on the streets. And it's not something really anybody should get used to. It's not great. But when you're just looking at this shit from the outside in and then you're hearing about the people who are supposedly perpetrating this shit, bragging about how they'll do it to somebody like you or somebody like your mother or somebody like your brother or anything like that. It's like looking back now and thinking about the reactions that people have and the fact that there's rap hip-hop police and everything and niggas want to bitch and complain about that. It's like, listen to your own fucking music. Do you not know the fucking people you keep around you? You can't just keep saying that, oh, this is just a performance, this is just an acting shit, and yet bodies keep piling up around you. You know what I'm saying? And anytime something happens in your vicinity, in your neighborhood and shit, you're just always wanting to keep mute. So yeah, I get, whatever, you're trying to keep up performances and shit, but it's like, it's so many motherfuckers are getting smoked, and it's not something that's slowed down. As a matter of fact, I feel like we're seeing more and more rappers, dudes that are getting killed under the age of 25. So many more young black men that are getting killed, not necessarily because of the police, from the government, but because of other black and brown men targeting them, trying to get clout, trying to get attention from women, trying to get record deals, quite literally. You know what I'm saying? Niggas gonna catch a body, and that becomes like the focus point of like a whole damn album. You know what I'm saying? And it's just going beyond self-preservation, because if it was like self-preservation and giving you like the downsides and the other side of the street shit, that's one thing. And there's plenty of niggas who are good for that, who are good at telling you like how it feels to be on top of the world and to feel like you have all the power because you got a gun and you got the bitches and you got everybody's hitting you up and everything. But then the dark side of it, you know what I'm saying? That like when it's time for you to pay a toll, when you get caught up in shit, that could mean your life. That could mean all the money you worked up to at that point. It could mean people trying to fucking set you up, including those same women or your homeboys you thought you was cool with, this family that you thought you were bought into or whatever. So it just doesn't work. You know what I'm saying? And then like at this, when it comes to like, culturally and people trying to deal with different groups interacting with one another and how to, and then the sensitivity of like, oh, you can't go and touch other people's kids and whatnot. Um, it's like the zero tolerance policies. All this does is that it makes peaceful people or people who aren't antagonized, who aren't the antagonists, it slowly pushes them down that road, because then you're cutting them out of the opportunity to just come back to school or come back to their jobs and shit. You're saying like, no, you fucked up once and you're no better than these other motherfuckers who openly brag about it and use it as a point of bolstering their rep. You know what I'm saying? And then it goes back to, and then going back up to the top of this conversation with the incident about that couple talking shit over the snow. It's I mean, it's fucked up, but I gotta be honest. The thing that most fucks me up about it is the fact that the dude killed himself. Because to keep it a buck, to keep it a hundo bundo, if I'm a judge and I'm hearing the case and everything, yeah, there's a certain legal, punishment that you have to hand down. But I gotta be frank with you. I would want to set a cultural precedent to other people that yeah, while we do punish people for, obviously taking things to that extreme, that that I want to encourage and kind of you kind of need to send a signal to society that what are you going to tolerate? What practices do you want people to commit to? Because these are things that can't necessarily be forced upon by a cop, but it can't be forced on by any type of like association, any other type of professional body or whatever. It's just kind of something that people have they have to opt into it mentally. They have to opt into it themselves and see it as a preferable way of dealing with one another and thinking about themselves and thinking about, other people in their communities. It's like, ultimately, I would want it to be understood that, yeah, while we punish this shit, that people who are constantly, trying to bully or intimidate or just be, petty and shit, that there's a punishment for that. There's no social pressure, saying not to be petty and not to be a bully and whatnot, because of the combination of the things that I already mentioned. And not to mention the fact, but this is a different tangent, that like, along with certain subsets of the culture that promote and glorify the violence and glorify the intimidation and bullying and everything, that what's also become glorified, and this isn't necessarily just through like hip-hop culture but it is something that we see definitely in marginalized communities, whether it's women and gay people or black and brown communities or whatever. It's pettiness. Not just the pettiness of like somebody talking shit about something they don't know about and you just come back with a really smart remark or whatever the fuck, but just being a condescending, bullying prick and talking shit down on other people is seen as something admirable, and you can be rewarded for that. Society, like reality TV and the people who have been influenced by social media and whatnot, has shown us and shown that there is a reward for treating people like shit and being inconsiderate and being petty, and that if you try to actually enforce people to be right by others, you can get your ass kicked, and it will be seen as righteous. You know what I'm saying? Because the thing is, all of this shit, like reflecting on all of this stuff and really being honest about it, and like just going back and like looking at some of these videos and thinking about some of the stories I've seen, some of the stories I've heard and stuff that's happened, it's like I am so much less empathetic now when I hear these arguments, when people just try to blame all of their life on the system and, oh, I was raised blah 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 blah. Because before, I used to be somebody that was very much like, no, you can't blame them. You got to look at the system and institutionalize this, implicit bias, blah, 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 right? All the woke shit, all the data, all the liberal, bleeding heart shit. And it's like, that's good to a certain point. And it's glad that stuff has become popular in its own regard and having an upstream influence through different parts of the culture and politics and business and all that shit, right? But at the same time, what's coincided with that has been a promotion of really shitty negative behaviors that reinforce things that are still negative. No matter what color you are, no matter what your gender, no matter what your race and shit, going and just talking down on people, calling people out their name and bullying, while it may not be against the law, it's like, I don't care about your fucking identity. You deserve to get your fucking ass kicked. Get smacked. The streets, they call it street justice, and it's for disrespect, right? Now, of course, anybody can, motherfuckers will say, they'll use different dumb shit to start a fight over. Oh, you stole my woman, or you stole my man, or you bumped into me, fool. Watch your, fuck, little type of bullshit. But to somebody who's getting in your face saying you a pussy ass bitch, or you a fag, or you're, this and that, it's like, no, it's not just necessarily something that you should have to call the cops over, but it should be something that people should have to pay a price for. You know what I'm saying? And when it comes to like people who are in the streets and people who are, usually low income, they don't usually care about the social pressure of, oh yeah, don't say that word, or don't talk about people like that, blah, 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 right? And then you get people who are callous, who have those same sentiments, but then they get rich. And they have, they have a bunch of goons and a bunch of people around them willing to do shit just because they have the money. You know what I'm saying? So it gets reinforced either way. So, my perception on like violence, my perception on people's conditioning, my perception on, how much shitty behavior should people have to just walk away from, versus intact, all that stuff, thinking about the zero tolerance policies and how we punish violence and how we look at people who participate in it without getting the details of who was the aggressor versus not the aggressor. It's super frustrating. All the pressure that people are under, adults and children, and everybody, because they're basically saying that certain parts of society have to accept that they potentially could become prey to other groups of people simply because of their upbringing, and that you can't criticize them, and you can't talk down on them, and you can't recognize it for what it is. It's like, certain white people, reinforce a bunch of bullshit, but it ain't all just white people. All right. When I hear about these activists and shit who are going against gun violence and going against, when I hear about these activists, whatever they're talking about in different cities, across the U.S. and shit, and I see it's black and brown people talking about stop the violence and all this stuff, and then they're getting shot down, they're getting killed. You know what I'm saying? It's like, no, I'm not going to sympathize with you niggas. You can cry all you want. You can do all the theatrics and whatever. But I'm just like, you know what? Yeah, I heard your story. I listened to the fuck the things that happened to you. But it's clear at a certain point, you leaned into that shit. And you continuously fucked up in the same way. Because I guess that's probably the last thing I'll say. I got to cut this thing off afterwards. I meant this like little beady bead. But that's the last thing I'll say is that because I'm very much in the school of thought that people deserve second, third, fourth, and fifth, sixth chances or whatever the fuck, everybody has a different, path to becoming a better person. However, the thing that you got to look out for, the way that you make a caveat with, or the caveat with that shit is, are you fucking up the exact same way the second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth time? Because if that's the case, then I gotta be honest. I become more understanding of, some of the laws that were implemented, even though they've had a lot of negative results. Like, listen, these are people this is an experiment. All societies are an experiment. All laws are an experiment. All human civilization is a giant experiment. All right, and it's really just kind of making, ironically, with all the stuff that's happened in 2020. It's been me reflecting on all these different incidents and thinking about my own life and other stories that I've heard that makes me slightly more empathetic, quite honestly, of law enforcement and slightly more sympathetic to like intelligence agencies and just having to keep an eye on people who are disrupting whatever the status quo is. Because the fact of the matter is, whatever your moral system is, whatever your moral code is, however you think society should be structured, you're going to need people that are willing to enforce those values. And it's not just going to be law enforcement that you need to enforce that. You need that to be in the culture. You need that to be in the politics. You need that to be in the media. It needs to be something that is accepted by the people and is promoted through the institutions. You know what I'm saying? And then you constantly have to keep an eye on people who are posing a threat to it, especially those that are saying it openly. And it's like, yes. It's like, yeah, I mean, I can talk all day about like the history of this country and all the different fucked up things that have happened. It's like, listen, black and brown folks, we ain't the only ones. All right. And the thing is, I'm not trying to get I'm not interested in like a struggle Olympics type thing of like, well, they didn't experience slavery, and they didn't experience blah blah blah. It's like nobody's saying that everybody's experience is the exact goddamn same. That's a cop out. That's a coping mechanism. You know, oh, my pain was especially special, and so you can't tell me nothing. And I'm not going to accept any other criticisms from anybody else. I'm not going to accept any insights. It's like nobody's saying that. Stop with the bullshit. You know what I'm saying? It's like we can talk about your individual experiences and recognize what they are and talk about the ways we can fix that shit or fight that shit. But then we also got to talk about the fact that, you know what I'm saying, that doesn't allow you to go around and talk, you know what I'm saying, refer to other people as slurs. That doesn't allow you, that doesn't just give you carte blanche to just go and intimidate and bully other people and just tell them what they're allowed to say and what they're not allowed to do and how they're allowed to dress. Fuck you. You know what I'm saying? And, you know, it's just frustrating, man. You know, just thinking about all the violence and people's perception and how careful people have to move. And because the thing is, and the reason why it's so critical to like challenge this shit, especially with the different things that are going on, and the desperation people feel themselves in, is because we're recognizing so much how this system reinforces bullshit and how the powers that be, the bullshit they're reinforcing, and how even the people that we entrust to use violence the right way and to take away people's freedom, that all the fuckery that they commit to, and that at a certain point, yeah, it's biased. It may be an active bias, but it's also just general biases. There's a study that shows that people, human beings in general, or judges, I should say, give lighter sentencing after lunchtime. That your judge could hand you down a harsher sentence before lunch because they're having low blood sugar or they're cranky, they're hangry, right? That's a real fucking thing. You know, so it's like we got human shit, just general human shit to deal with. We got people who are biased against certain groups of people, you know what I'm saying? And then we got a system that, of course, wants to maintain itself, and it's going to naturally, any type of power structure or institution is going to protect itself from intruders, you know what I'm saying, or those that are trying to disrupt it. No system or group is going to go down without a fight, usually. You know what I'm saying? But that means we got to change the laws. We also have to change our general perception towards violence and the way in which we accept the behavior of other people. You know? Yeah, I mean, that's mainly what I wanted to talk about. I mean, there's other ways I can go with that, but other places I can go, but that's kind of really all I wanted to touch on. You know, we got to change our ways we look at violence and come to recognize the fact that there are a lot of people that as long as we have this idea that anybody who commits any amount of violence and that we have a zero tolerance perception towards that, then really it's actually just kind of pushing all of us to be demonized by this system and categorized as a threat in general, and pushing everyone to the same extremes and points of desperation and doing fucked up things that are traumatic for themselves and for others, as opposed to saying, as opposed to looking at these situations differently and saying, no, you know what I'm saying, maybe the person went a little too far in their response, but the other people in question needed to see that there was some retaliation, acting like a piece of shit. There needed to be some more social pressure because they weren't responding to some of the other, they weren't quite responsive to the other, actions, to the other pushback. Sometimes you need pushback. And, we can't just keep, demonizing and having this very narrow perspective towards this shit. And sometimes it is better off if you just keep your fucking mouth shut and walk away. Or sometimes it's just better that even if you're not necessarily in the wrong or something wasn't that big of a deal, to just still be like, hey, you know what? I'll keep that in mind going forward or whatever, just to keep things going smoothly, because you never know how close somebody is to the edge. And if you're pushing somebody, over the edge, then you can't be too surprised, or you should be able to deal with the consequences of seeing what happens when you do that shit, quite frankly, because the thing is, I don't usually watch, it's been a long time since I watched something like that gory or that, like, I'm not really into the violence, I don't really reinforce that stuff, but it's like I had a perspective on it before I seen the video. I just heard the story, and then I seen the video and I'm listening to it, and I was thinking about all the conversations or interactions I've had with people like that, or all the times I've heard shit like that, and just being like, we try to tell ourselves, oh, people like that, they're not going to get far in life, or they're not going to have, good long lives, or they're not going to have any influence or whatever. They're just going to be done in the streets or whatever. But it's like, no, plenty of people who are bullies, plenty of people who intimidate others and get off on that and just won't call people every name in the book. They become CEOs, they become politicians, they become cops. You know what I'm saying? They become influential people in society. They become regular people who do the same shit to other adults. And then good, saying decent people. Well, I shouldn't say good people. I say people who are usually don't try to fall into that shit. It's just reinforcing the trauma that you've gone through as a teenager. And it's just kind of reinforcing that. It's kind of reinforcing this fucked up notion that being a piece of shit, being petty, being a bully is the way to make it. And this is awful for all of society. That is not what you need. You need people to be diplomatic. You need people to de-escalate. You need people to be considerate and empathetic. And having zero tolerance policies towards violence impede that shit. Allowing people who are glorifying violence and glorifying pettiness and glorifying intimidation and all that shit gets in the way of that. And it's something that, while we're talking about all the institutions and we're talking about the economy and the government and police and everything, while those things are true and very real, we also need to be talking about ourselves and talking about the shit that we tolerate and what we accept and how we perceive one another and how we react to different things. And accept the fact that life is going to include far more grays than blacks and whites. And that needs to be reflected in our laws, but also in the way in which we treat one another and look at one another, Because that shit was wild. I watched it and I was just thinking about all the different videos to see and all the different interactions and all the different stories and stuff. And I'm just like, motherfuckers not learning. They're not trying to change because it's at a certain point you have to reinforce certain ideologies and certain ways of thinking and behavior. And the shit does get reinforced. People get reinforced to this shit at a young age, and hell, some people discover it at a late age and get rewarded just the same. So, yeah. But that's all I got to say about that. I thought every time I do this shit, I think it's going to be shorter, but I always going to fit at least an hour. So, but that was, I guess, another We Was Live, talking about violence, the gray area, and how this culture of glorifying bullying and intimidation and pettiness, even as adults, and not being empathetic to one another and pushing people to the edge, it's destructive. It's bad for all of us. It's we've already seen the ramifications of that, and it can only get worse. You know what I'm saying? And then understand that if you're doing fuckery, that people don't fucked up shit, that you have to expect those whom are trying to maintain the opposite of that, understand their reactions to it. And not just try to boil everything down to this basic, oh, you only hate me because of this, you only hate me because of that. Maybe that's part of it. Maybe you're also just threatening people's general safety. So maybe people shouldn't have to walk down the street thinking they might have to pay a toll to somebody just because they feel like they own a block. You know what I'm saying? Or they might take their life and shit, So just something to think about. We Was Live. I think this is number 8. Thinking about violence and the culture. So I will talk to y'all later, and have a good night.